Hi, everyone. Have you ever experienced this feeling? You study very carefully, take lots of notes, but after just a few days, the knowledge seems to vanish. Interestingly, the problem isn't that you haven't studied enough, but rather that we haven't designed ourselves to remember and forget. In today's video, we'll explore rule number 5 in the 12 laws of the brain, repetition to remember. This rule helps us understand why human memory is moderately strong, why forgetting isn't a fault but a survival mechanism, and most importantly, how to transform fleeting knowledge into lasting memories. Let's begin with an extreme paradox of human memory. Part 1. The paradox of memory. Why do we remember and forget? Before we begin, I have a question for everyone. So, in your opinion, is a perfect memory like Kim Peek's truly a perfect evolutionary advantage for modern humans? Or is the ability to forget, even to a lesser degree, like patient HM, a necessary protective mechanism of the brain? To find out who Kim Peek and HM are, let's continue with the issue. We often take memory for granted. But the truth is, it works in extremely complex and sometimes extreme ways. Look at Kim Peek, who can read 2 pages of a book at once and permanently remember every detail. Conversely, patient HM lives in an eternal present. After brain surgery, he completely lost the ability to create new long-term memories, to the point of forgetting someone he had just spoken to after only an hour. This contrast isn't just a medical anomaly, it's key to understanding how our brains form and retain information. Based on that, you now have the answer to the question. In your opinion, is a perfect memory like Kim Peek's truly a perfect evolutionary advantage for modern humans? Or is the ability to forget, even to a lesser degree, like patient HM, a necessary protective mechanism of the brain? The answer is, a perfect memory isn't necessarily optimal. The brain needs the ability to filter out unnecessary information to focus on what's important. The difference between Peek and HM shows that memory isn't just about storage, but about balancing what's valuable and discarding what's unnecessary to maintain flexibility in thinking. From this remarkable difference between brains, we must confront a harsher reality. Most of us are more like HM patients than Kim Peek in terms of forgetfulness. Why is that? And is there a way to overcome it?
Part 2. The forgetting curve and the battle against knowledge evaporation. Before we get to this part, I have a question for everyone. Based on the forgetting curve, if you only have 15 minutes to review a 2-hour lecture, what time would you choose to review for maximum effectiveness, and why? Returning to the main point, in the 19th century, researcher Hermann Ebbinghaus demonstrated that forgetting is not accidental. He discovered the forgetting curve. We forget up to 90% of what we learn within just 30 days, a shocking figure. Even more concerning, most of this loss occurs within the first few hours after learning. This shows that if we don't have the right strategy from the moment we receive information, our learning efforts will almost certainly be in vain. Based on that, you now have the answer to the question. Based on the forgetting curve, if you only have 15 minutes to review a 2-hour lecture, what time would you choose to review for maximum effectiveness, and why? The answer is the first few hours after learning, because the fastest rate of forgetting occurs immediately after receiving information. Reviewing early will help stop the evaporation of knowledge and consolidate memories before they are erased from short-term memory. To combat the forgetting curve, we need to penetrate the brain's memory factory, where the first step, encoding, determines everything. Part 3. The encoding mechanism, the grinder and information fragmentation. Before we get to this part, I have a question for everyone.
If the brain stores information in a fragmented way, like the scraps from a grinder, what happens when one of those storage areas is damaged? How do we ensure that memories can still be recovered? Let's get back to the main point. The life cycle of a memory consists of encoding, storage, retrieval, forgetting. Many people mistakenly think the brain is like a video camera that records everything intact. But in reality, it's like a grinder without a lid. When information enters, it's chopped into small pieces and scattered throughout the cerebral cortex. Color is in one place, language is in another, context is in yet another. For example, there are patients who may know the position of vowels in a word but cannot write them, demonstrating that content and context are stored separately. Based on that, you have the answer to the question. If the brain stores information in a fragmented way, like the scraps from a grinder, what happens when one of those storage areas is damaged? How do we ensure that memories can still be recovered? When one area is damaged, that part of the memory may be missing, as in the case of not being able to write vowels. To ensure lasting memory, we need multisensory and multi-contextual encoding. The more connections we create in different brain regions, images, sounds, meaning, the more detours we have to retrieve information if a connection is lost. Understanding the fragmentation of the brain, we realize that the solution is not to learn more, but to learn more deeply. Imagine information as individual bricks. To build a solid house of memory, we need a special mortar to bind it together. That is the meaning of information and the place it belongs. We will explore that bonding mortar together in Part 4, Deep Encoding Tactics and the Power of Context. Before we get to this part, I have a question for everyone. How would you apply this principle to preparing for an important presentation or an exam to minimize forgetting due to context changes? Returning to the main point, making the learning process more complex and meaningful actually leads to much better memorization. A classic experiment showed the group that thought about the meaning of words in a sentence was 2 to 3 times more likely to recall than the group that only looked at the letter structure. In addition, the environmental context plays an extremely important role. Research on divers showed if they studied underwater but took a test on land, their memory performance dropped sharply. The learning environment is encoded along with the information and becomes part of that memory. Based on that, you have the answer to the question. How would you apply this principle to preparing for an important presentation or an exam to minimize forgetting due to context changes? Therefore, the answer is practice in an environment that is as close to real life as possible. If that's not possible, recreate the mindset and context in your mind to activate the previously encoded connections. All of the above theories converge into a practical toolkit that anyone can apply to master their memory. Imagine memory as wet cement. You only have a very short time to shape it before it hardens. This toolkit will help you make the most of that precious time. Part 5. Building a memory toolkit and the first minute rule. Before we get to this part, I have a question for everyone. Why does the first moment have more power than any other stage in the entire learning process? And how do you design the perfect first moment for a dry subject? Back to the main point. To turn information into lasting memories, apply these 3 strategies. 1. Personal connection. Always connect new knowledge to your real-world experience. 2. Invest in the first moment. The quality of the first few moments of receiving information determines your ability to remember it later. 3. Recreate the context. Try to bring yourself back to the learning environment or mental state when you need to recall it. Why does the first moment have more power than any other stage in the entire learning process? And how do you design the perfect first moment for a dry subject? The first moment is when the brain performs initial encoding. If this step is done superficially, subsequent data storage steps will lack quality data to work with. To design this moment for a dry topic, start with a challenging question, a shocking situation, or a direct connection to personal gain. This forces the brain to deeply encode from the outset. Therefore, memory is not an unlimited storage space, but an intelligent system that constantly selects, organizes, and discards. Rule number 5 reminds us that it's not about learning a lot to remember a long time, but about encoding correctly, recalling correctly, and in the right context. If you find yourself forgetful, remember that it's not a weakness, but a natural characteristic of the brain. The difference lies in whether you know how to work with it. Thank you for watching the video to the end. If you found this content helpful, please share it with those who are studying and doing intellectual work. See you again in the next rule of the 12 Rules of the Brain series. Goodbye.